She thought it was just another Thursday at Marcy's diner, until he walked in. A man in a wrinkled suit, out of place, lost in thought. LaToya had seen countless customers, but something about him was different. He only asked for water, but his eyes told a deeper story. What was he running from, and why did helping him change her life forever? Where are you watching this video from? Comment below. Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep following these inspiring stories. It was another ordinary Thursday morning at Marcy's diner. The steady hum of breakfast orders filled the small space, the clinking of coffee cups and sizzling bacon in the air. For LaToya, this was her sanctuary, a job that, though far from glamorous, gave her purpose. She had worked here for 7 years, and in that time she'd learned to read people just by their expressions. But today was different. The bell above the door jingled as a man stepped inside, the kind of customer the diner wasn't used to seeing. He wore a suit, though wrinkled and a bit disheveled, looking every bit out of place in the casual blue-collar diner. His eyes swept the room as though searching for a familiar face, but when he didn't find one, his gaze dropped to the table in the corner. LaToya observed him from behind the counter. Something in his demeanor stood out. His body language, stiff and reluctant, said it all. He wasn't just another businessman on a quick coffee break. There was an unspoken sadness behind his eyes, a weariness that seemed too heavy for his young face. She could see it clearly, the way his shoulders slumped, and how he dragged his feet, moving like he was carrying the weight of the world on his back. It wasn't her usual instinct to approach strangers, but LaToya couldn't ignore the feeling that lingered in her gut. She picked up a menu and walked over, her warm smile lighting up the small space. She greeted him with her signature kindness, but he barely acknowledged her. Instead, he mumbled, "Just water, please." LaToya didn't press him for more. She could tell he wasn't ready to engage in conversation, so she left him alone to think. As she walked back to the counter, her mind lingered on him. Something wasn't right, and it bothered her. But before she could think further, her boss, Mr. William Harper, was already scolding her from across the room. "LaToya," he called, his voice sharp and cutting. "We don't have time to cater to loiterers. If he's not ordering, he needs to leave." His words stung, but LaToya didn't let them show. LaToya's mind raced as she refilled the coffee pot, the words from Mr. William Harper lingering in the air like an oppressive weight. He didn't understand, didn't see people the way she did. To him, they were just customers, transactions, but to LaToya they were more than that. Everyone had a story, and sometimes they just needed someone to treat them like a human being. She tried to shake off the tension in her chest, returning her focus to the diner's routine, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the man in the corner. He hadn't asked for anything more than water, and he'd barely touched it. The way he held himself, so withdrawn, so lost, kept pulling at her heart. She couldn't ignore it. As the minutes ticked by, LaToya found herself glancing over at him from time to time, noticing the small signs that told her he wasn't just tired. Something was off. His hands trembled as they brushed the napkin at his side, his tie still crooked and out of place. She knew that look. He was wrestling with something inside, something deeper than a bad morning. Her shift was quieter now, the usual post-rush lull giving her time to think. She moved toward him once again, this time with a subtle shift in her demeanor. Her approach wasn't forced, just a quiet presence, offering a bit of warmth in a place that often felt cold with routine. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, her voice low but gentle. "It's tough to get through a day when everything's out of sync. I get it." He looked up at her for the first time, his weary eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something there, recognition perhaps. She smiled faintly, but he didn't respond immediately, just nodded. She didn't push him. Instead, she quietly refilled his water without asking, setting the pot back down and slipping away to give him space. But something inside her clicked. Sometimes it wasn't about fixing everything for someone. It was about showing them they mattered, if even for just a moment. LaToya kept her distance, but she kept watching. Every small gesture mattered. As the seconds stretched into minutes, she hoped her kindness was reaching him, just a little. The minutes ticked by slowly, and LaToya went back to her tasks, but her eyes kept drifting toward the man in the corner. Something about him seemed different, out of place in the diner's otherwise familiar routine. She couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet demeanor held a story she wasn't yet hearing. As the morning wore on, she glanced at the clock. She still had a few minutes before the next wave of customers would arrive, and she used the time to clear off tables, wiping them down in quick, practiced motions. Yet her attention remained with the man. His gaze never lifted from the table, his hands now fidgeting with the napkin she'd given him. She knew it was the smallest of gestures, but it made her wonder what had driven him to this point. How often did people go unnoticed when they were carrying heavy burdens? Too often, she thought. She couldn't ignore the way he shifted in his seat, his movements slow and hesitant, like he wasn't sure what to do next. He wasn't just some random stranger. There was something in his eyes that Latoya recognized. He was lost, but more than that, he was disconnected from everything, from the world outside, from himself, maybe even from the man he once was. Her heart ached for him, even though she didn't know him. After a long while, she saw him glance at the menu, then put it down again with a sigh. He looked torn, uncertain. That's when Latoya made her decision. She couldn't ignore him any longer. She couldn't keep pretending she hadn't seen the quiet struggle etched on his face. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle of recognizing humanity in someone who might feel like he'd lost it. She approached his table again, but this time she wasn't just doing her job. She wasn't just a waitress offering a cup of coffee or refilling his glass. She was offering something real. She placed a hand gently on the table next to him, her voice steady but kind. "You know, I can't help but notice you seem a little out of sorts," she said softly. "You need someone to talk to?" Matthew Roberts froze, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. For the first time, he really looked at her, and in his gaze there was something like gratitude, but more, something deeper, something. The moment hung in the air between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Matthew Roberts blinked, as though he hadn't expected the simple offer of kindness to cut through the wall he'd built around himself. Latoya didn't move, giving him space to process, allowing him to speak or not speak on his own terms. She wasn't in a hurry, not for once. She didn't expect him to reveal his life story right there, but it felt important to offer him the chance, to show him that he wasn't invisible. After a long pause, Matthew finally spoke, his voice quiet and hoarse, like it had been unused for a while. I don't know where to begin," he said, almost as if he were talking to himself more than to her. Latoya didn't press. Instead, she nodded, keeping her expression neutral but warm, her hand still resting on the table. She knew he didn't need a flood of words. He needed someone who would listen. Another long silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. There was a sort of quiet comfort in the space they shared, and slowly Matthew began to open up, more to himself than to her at first. "I've lost my way, you know, lost my sense of direction. I thought if I kept running, kept moving, I'd find the answers. But it's not working. It's like I'm standing still, but I'm stuck in a loop." Latoya's heart softened, hearing the vulnerability in his words. She had seen many people walk through the doors of Marcy's diner, each one carrying their own weight, their own struggles. She'd seen the proud ones, the ones who smiled through their pain, and the ones who wore their grief like a shroud. But Matthew, for all his outward composure, was breaking. Not all at once, but piece by piece, and it was in those cracks where the real person existed, the person who didn't want to be forgotten, who longed to be seen. "You're not alone in that," she said softly, her voice firm but understanding. "Everyone hits a point where they feel lost, but you have more control than you think. It's okay to take a breath, to stop running for a minute." Matthew looked at her again, and for the first time, his shoulders seemed to relax. She hadn't solved anything. She hadn't made grand promises, but in that moment, she'd offered him something far more valuable. Matthew's expression shifted, a flicker of something like hope crossing his features. For the first time in their brief exchange, he leaned back in his seat, as though the weight on his shoulders had lightened ever so slightly. Latoya waited, letting him gather his thoughts, knowing that some people needed time to process even the simplest gestures of kindness. As she returned to her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation, this moment, had somehow changed the air in the diner. She had always been the one who gave, who listened, who picked up the pieces for everyone else. But today, something had felt different. It wasn't just a random act of kindness anymore. It was a turning point. Matthew's voice broke the silence again. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his words slower now, more deliberate. "Most people, they wouldn't even care. They'd just see me as another person to ignore or avoid. But you treated me like I was someone worth noticing." Latoya smiled softly, her gaze steady. "You are someone worth noticing," she said, simply. It wasn't just a statement, it was the truth, spoken without hesitation. He nodded, taking in her words. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The bustling sounds of the diner filled the quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted, more than just a mere transaction of food, more than just a waitress doing her job. This was something else entirely, something that touched deeper than either of them had expected. As Matthew stood to leave, Latoya offered him a small nod of acknowledgement, her voice soft but unwavering. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or just a place to sit down and have a meal, you know where to find me." He met her gaze, a mixture of gratitude and resolve in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "I might just take you up on that." Latoya watched as he left, his figure disappearing through the door of the diner, a bit more grounded than when he had entered. And as she returned to her station, she realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, the ones that seem insignificant, are the ones that can change someone's day, or even their life. Her mind briefly flashed to Mr. William Harper, still fuming in his office, and a quiet sense of defiance rose within her. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who could make a difference, in ways she hadn't even realized until now. As the day wore on, Latoya's mind kept drifting back to Matthew's visit, his words echoing in her thoughts. It wasn't just about the meal, it was about how, for a brief moment, she had seen the world through someone else's eyes. She had been the person who extended kindness without question, but now she realized the depth of that impact. It wasn't about saving someone or making a grand gesture. It was about offering something simple and sincere, a chance for another person to feel seen. The bell above the diner's door jingled, signaling the arrival of another customer. But Latoya barely noticed. Her focus was split between her duties and her reflections. She couldn't help but replay the exchange with Mr. William Harper, his words still sharp in her memory. She knew deep down that she couldn't keep working in a place that didn't value the things she did, the simple acts that created genuine connections. She wasn't just a waitress, and she didn't want to be treated as one. She had more to offer than just a smile and a plate of food. Just as the final customers of the day left and the diner began to empty, Mr. William Harper's voice broke her train of thought. "Latoya," he called from the back. "My office, now." Latoya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew was coming. She had always been good at reading people, and she could tell that Mr. William Harper wasn't done with their earlier confrontation. Still, she couldn't back down, not this time. She walked into his office, the walls of which were filled with dusty old records and fading photographs. The air in the cramped space felt heavy, thick with the scent of stale coffee and frustration. Mr. William Harper was sitting behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes sharp as they focused on her. "Latoya, we need to talk about what happened earlier," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. Latoya didn't flinch. She knew that what she had done, in his eyes, was a violation of the rules. But in her heart, she knew it was the right thing. Her quiet confidence didn't waver as she met his gaze. "I don't regret it," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I did what I thought was right, and I wouldn't take it back." Mr. William Harper's eyebrows furrowed, his jaw clenched as he tried to assert control over the situation. But Latoya wasn't backing down. "This job may be important to you, but to me it's about more than just the paycheck," she continued. "It's about being a person, not just a worker." There was a long silence before Mr. William Harper spoke again. "I'm not sure you understand," he muttered under his breath. But Latoya didn't wait for him to finish. "I do understand," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm not just someone who serves food. I'm someone who can make a difference. Maybe it's time you remembered that." The words hung in the air, lingering like a weight, and for a moment Mr. William Harper didn't speak. LaToya's resolve was stronger than ever, and in that instant she realized that whatever happened next, she had done the right thing. There was no turning back. The days following her conversation with Mr. William Harper were quiet, but LaToya couldn't shake the unease that lingered in her chest. She had walked away from the diner, but the sense of loss wasn't as sharp as she expected. Instead, she felt a stirring inside her, something new, something she couldn't quite name yet, but that had begun to take root in her heart. LaToya spent the next few days adjusting to the absence of the diner's hum in the background of her life. She was used to the steady rhythm of early mornings, the clinking of silverware and the chatter of regular customers, but it felt strangely peaceful in her small apartment. The solitude gave her time to think, to reflect on the path she was now walking, one that seemed uncertain, but, for the first time in a long while, it also felt free. But even in the stillness, she couldn't ignore the nagging worry about what was next. The bills were piling up, the apartment rent was overdue, and the future felt uncertain. She knew she couldn't sit idly by for too long. Something had to change. She needed a purpose, a way to move forward, even without the comfort of her old routine. It was then that the doorbell rang, shattering the quiet. LaToya froze for a moment, wondering if it was just another bill collector or someone from the diner, maybe Mr. William Harper with an apology. But when she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Standing on the other side was David Bennett, the man from the diner. "Morning, LaToya," he greeted with a warm smile, holding out a small envelope. "I owe you an explanation, and a thank you." LaToya stood there, stunned for a moment. David had come to her apartment. This wasn't something she had expected, or had even wanted. Yet, there he was in front of her, with a sincerity in his eyes that made her hesitate before speaking. "May I come in?" David asked, holding up the envelope like a gesture of peace. Still unsure of his intentions, LaToya stepped aside and let him enter. David glanced around her small apartment, a knowing look crossing his face as he took in the modest surroundings. "I can see how things are," he said, smiling kindly. "But I didn't just come here to say thank you." LaToya raised an eyebrow, her arms crossed defensively. "What do you mean?" "I need you to know something. What you did yesterday, it wasn't just an act of kindness," David said, his voice earnest. "You showed me something rare. You treated me like a human being when the world often treats people like me as a problem to be fixed." LaToya was taken aback. She had no idea what he was getting at. "I just helped you out. You were hungry, and I didn't want to see you go without." David's eyes softened. "That's the point, LaToya. You helped because you saw the person in front of you, not the circumstances. And I want to help you, in the same way." LaToya was silent, struggling to absorb his words. "But why me? There are so many other people who need help." David smiled again. "Because you didn't just help out of pity or obligation. You did it because it was the right thing to do. And that's why I'm here." He handed her the envelope, and LaToya took it slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a check, an amount that made her breath catch. It was far more than she had ever expected, or even imagined. "I want to help you," David said, his voice steady but full of meaning. "I've seen something in you. You have the kind of kindness and strength that could build something bigger than you ever dreamed. If you're willing to take the leap, I can help you create a future for yourself, a better one. I'm offering you a chance to start over." LaToya looked at the check again, her mind racing. She was torn. On one hand, it felt like a gift, an opportunity she'd never get again. On the other, it felt overwhelming, and a part of her resisted accepting something so generous from a stranger. "I don't know what to say," LaToya whispered. "You don't have to say anything yet," David Bennett replied gently. "But I want you to think about it. You've already proven what kind of person you are. Let me help you build something more with that kindness. Let me help you help others." LaToya sat down on the couch, her heart pounding as the weight of the decision settled over her. She thought about her life in the diner, the struggles, the hours spent just trying to make ends meet. But she also thought about what David had said, that she had something special. She had always wanted more, but she had never believed it was possible for her. Now, it seemed like it could be. For the first time in a long while, LaToya allowed herself to dream. It was scary, yes, but it was also thrilling. "I'll do it," she said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "I'll take the leap. I want to build something better." David's smile was warm and genuine. "You won't regret it." LaToya felt the weight of the decision settle in a way that didn't feel burdensome. It felt like the first step toward something meaningful. It was the beginning of a new chapter. And as she looked out the window, watching the world go by, she knew this was just the start. The story of LaToya serves as a powerful reminder of the impact of small acts of kindness and standing firm in your values, especially when faced with adversity. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to overlook the significance of helping others, especially when the act seems insignificant. But sometimes, the most meaningful connections are born from simple gestures, like offering a meal to someone who needs it, even when it's inconvenient. LaToya's choice to treat the man with kindness, despite the pressure from her boss, demonstrates the importance of staying true to your principles. In a world where people often prioritize efficiency and profit over empathy, it's crucial to remember that our actions can shape not only our own lives, but the lives of others. Her decision to stand up for what she believed in, even if it cost her job, shows that doing what's right is more important than following orders or conforming to expectations. In your own life, consider how you can bring more kindness into your daily interactions. It may not always be easy, and sometimes it may feel like a sacrifice, but it can have lasting effects. Whether it's helping a coworker, offering a listening ear to a friend, or simply treating someone with respect, you never know how much it might mean to the other person. Just like LaToya, you have the power to make a difference, one act of kindness at a time. Stay true to your values and trust that the right opportunities will follow. What happens when a simple act of kindness leads to an unexpected turn of events? LaToya, a waitress at a small diner, unknowingly becomes the center of a powerful transformation after helping a mysterious stranger. Little did she know, her actions would open doors she never imagined. Don't miss how this seemingly small gesture changed everything.